Today is October 11th, 2022. I want to talk about the situation in and around Ukraine. Of course, the big news is these massive missile strikes Russia began launching yesterday, and they have continued in conjunction with drone strikes. I'm sure military aviation is also involved. And this is following the attack on Saturday on the Crimean bridge. And at the time I had warned about Ukraine and the West not just trivializing attacks on civilian infrastructure, but celebrating it. I think, in a very inhuman way. And I warned that all they're doing is paving the way for Russia to retaliate in the same way, only Russia has the means to do it on a much larger scale. So this is what we're seeing, these missile strikes. And I just want to, before I get into the details here, I want to show you, compare and contrast the way the Western media has covered the attack on the Crimean bridge and now these missile strikes by Russia. So two BBC articles. The first one, Crimean bridge, excitement and fear in Ukraine after bridge blast. And here we see people seem quite excited and happy about what was a terrorist attack on the bridge. Now, people will say the bridge was used to transport military equipment to legitimate military target. Okay, but when you're targeting civilian infrastructure and trying to claim it is a military target, it also matters how you target the bridge. And if you vaporized a car with civilians in it, and you also used a truck driven by someone who had no idea there was a bomb in the back, that is terrorism. What does the BBC article say? It says, videos of the damaged Crimean bridge have spread like wildfire on social media. This is already being compared to the sinking of the Russian warship Moskva in April. The guided missile cruiser Moskva and the Kerch Bridge, two notorious symbols of Russian power in Ukrainian Crimea, have gone down, tweeted Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. What's next in line, Ruskies? It went on. Ukraine's inventive social media activists are gleefully pumping out memes to celebrate the occasion. And Ukraine's second largest bank, Monobank, says it has already issued a debit card design featuring the collapsed bridge. Well, the bridge is already back in operation, and the parts that have collapsed will be repaired shortly. The article goes on and says that Ukraine's Secretary of the National Security Council wasn't the only one noting that the attack came just a day after Vladimir Putin's 70th birthday, tweeting a video of the damaged bridge next to Marilyn Monroe's famous performance of Happy Birthday, Mr. President from 1962. The sense of excitement is palpable. This is what the BBC wrote in their article. Now, if Ukraine striking civilian infrastructure, especially in this manner, is a event to celebrate, how then do we not expect Russia to see it in the exact same way? Civilian infrastructure is fair game, and destroying it is not just okay, but it's time for excitement and celebration. This is the danger of war propaganda, dehumanizing your enemy. It's all fine and good until the shoe is on the other foot. So let's look at the second article. The shoe is now on the other foot. Shock and horror after Russia's wave of strikes across Ukraine. So no more smiling people. Now we're all real serious. We're all real concerned here. The article says the past few hours have seen wave after wave of explosions. Now it's day after day. Not just here in Kyiv, but all across this vast country, from Lvov in the west to Kharkov in the east and Odessa in the south. For those of us who were here when Russia's full-scale invasion, not a special military operation according to the BBC, began in February, there's an element of deja vu. We've been told to spend as much time as we can in the basement as further attacks using missiles and drones are expected. But this is also different. The explosions here in Kyiv are much closer to the center, not distant thumps from the suburbs, but loud reverberations close to streets and locations we've come to know well in the past 8 months. And the article concludes by saying, 2 days ago, social media was flooded with videos and memes as Ukrainians wildly celebrated the attack on the bridge linking Russia to the Crimean Peninsula. Today, the videos are all of shell-shocked residents, fiery debris, and urgent warnings. So just compare how the BBC deals with attacks on Russian civilian infrastructure and then attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. It's very clear the BBC is in absolutely no danger of being objective. Now, there are reports that water, electricity, and communication has been knocked out in certain areas. It is on and off in certain areas. Even today, I was reading about disruptions. I don't know the full extent, and I don't know how permanent it is. The timing of these attacks, of course, comes at a time where a retaliation was expected by Russia for the strikes on the Crimean bridge. But we're also at a period of time where I don't think Ukraine's series of offensives are fully over, but they have reached very near their fullest extension. Their ranks have been thinned out. They are losing troops and equipment they cannot replace. I have said this over and over again. They cannot sustain this. This is not going to last forever. It's going to reach its limit, and then Ukraine is going to be in a very vulnerable position. That would be a great time for Russia to push back. One of the things that they might do is take out Ukrainian infrastructure. The BBC says full-scale invasion in February. It wasn't. They spared Ukraine's infrastructure then. It was only until very recently that Russia began targeting Ukrainian infrastructure. Targeting that infrastructure would be a step toward something much closer to full-scale war than what Russia has been doing these past months. There's another factor to consider. And I just mentioned how Ukraine cannot replace the men and equipment they are losing. This is because we can see the West is out of heavy weapons to send Ukraine. They are looking everywhere to send anything else they can send. They have nothing left that they can send to Ukraine that is practical to send and that would make any difference on the battlefield at all, even if the goal was just to keep this going a little longer. I've already covered how essentials, ammunition for 155 millimeter artillery systems, that is running out. The US cannot replace it. Rockets for HIMARS, tanks, all of these things are gone. And they admit it'll be years before they're able to ramp up production and return to the levels they had before this conflict began. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more in just a moment, but getting back to Russia's missile strikes. Now, if this was timed just for retaliation, if this was just retaliation for the attack on the Crimean bridge, then it'll last a day or two, and then it'll be over. And then there will be a period of time Russia relents and allows an opportunity for Ukraine and its sponsors to negotiate or to at least de-escalate. And if this is not that, if this is really the beginning of a much larger scale and more intense Russian military operation, then we will see these missile strikes and drone strikes persist. They will take out infrastructure. They will continue taking out more and more infrastructure. They will also ensure that infrastructure taken out is not brought back online. So we have to keep a close eye on the tempo of this, the duration, and the targets that are being hit. Either is a possibility. We just have to wait and see. Let's take a look at the map, liveuamap.com. This is a pro-Ukrainian map. And I use this specifically to give Ukraine benefit of the doubt and to show you that even they are showing a bleak picture. This is not Russia saying this. So as you can see, there are attacks all across the country from west to east, from north to south. The front lines, the first and largest offensive Ukraine launched in Kherson. These lines have stabilized. There's no noticeable activity here. That doesn't mean there won't be. I'm sure Ukraine is preparing for another push, and Russian forces are preparing to defend against another push. This whole line, Zaporozhye, down toward Melitopol and also Ugledar down to Mariupol. Anywhere along this line, people on both sides, Russian and Ukrainian sources, are expecting some sort of third offensive launched by Ukraine. And then the Kharkov offensive has ground to a halt. The lines have stabilized along the boundary of Lugansk and Lyman. They took Lyman and things ground to a halt. There are reports, it's not reflected on this map, but there are reports that Russian forces are now on the offensive and they are taking back small villages. It remains to be seen if this is actually happening and whether this is temporary or not. But one place where Russia is making steady gains that even the West is admitting is Bakhmut. Bakhmut is right here. Zoom in. And I don't think this map really reflects the full scale of the encirclement, but even here they show the red very close to Bakhmut. They even have rifle icons like this, which means the fighting may have even reached this area. Well, this is in the outskirts or starting to enter the city. And the UK Ministry of Defense, in one of their intelligence updates, this is from yesterday, and it's saying, over the last week, Russian forces have advanced up to 2 kilometers toward the town on 2 axes, coming closer to breaking into Bakhmut, which has suffered very extensive damage from shelling. Bakhmut is part of the Seversk Soledar Bakhmut defense line, is one of the last significant defense lines Ukraine has. If Russia is able to take Bakhmut, then there's a big hole in this defensive line, putting their Ukrainian flanks in danger. And this allows Russia to move up toward Kramatorsk and Slavyansk from south to north. It also allows Russian forces to move south and endanger positions that are trying to protect Ukrainian flanks in places like Avdiivka. And Avdiivka, right outside of Donetsk city, this is where Ukraine launches artillery and rocket strikes on Donetsk city. This is a civilian area, no military targets. They're just doing it to terrorize the population and place pressure on Russia, political pressure, essentially. And what is that? That is the definition of terrorism. And when I say defense line, I'm talking about trench networks that are overlapping and layered, including concrete fortifications and towns and cities that have been turned into virtual fortresses. This is what Russia has been trying to work their way through. That's why it's taking so long. They're working their way through in such a way that they conserve their manpower and equipment while taking a heavy cost out on Ukraine. When Ukraine launches an offensive, they do it at the expense of their own men and equipment, and Russian forces fade away. They do not allow themselves to be encircled or put into positions where they take heavy losses. So this is not sustainable for Ukraine at all. Whether they're on the defensive or they're on the offensive, they are the ones taking heavy losses, not Russia. Now, speaking of losses, I'm constantly bringing this topic up, and more I'm sharing with you reports from the Western media telling you that the West is out of weapons, out of ammunition for Ukraine. And so what are they going to do if there's nothing else to send? What happens next? The implications are very serious. And now, after these missile strikes by Russia, Ukraine is begging for all other types of advanced weapons. But is this realistic at all? So let's look at this article from Politico. Kyiv calls for air defenses as Putin brings his Syria tactics to Ukraine. Well, what did Russia do in Syria? They defeated terrorists, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Something to think about. The article says Zelensky renewed his appeals to the West to provide Ukraine with additional air defenses. Kyiv has been seeking this additional firepower for weeks, arguing that Russia is likely to try to knock out Ukraine's energy and industrial infrastructure over the winter, and it has been disappointed by the slow response. In tweets, Zelensky said he had spoken with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron in the wake of the strikes on the capital and other cities, with Macron Zelensky said, "We discussed the strengthening of our air defense, the need for a tough European and international reaction, as well as increased pressure on the Russian Federation. Those discussions on air defense batteries are now likely to loom large at the US-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group, also known as the Rammstein format, which I think will be taking place on October 13th, if I'm not mistaken. I will cover it when it's over and the results are public, whichever day it takes place. This is where senior defense officials from across the globe will gather in Brussels, from across the globe, from across the West is what they meant. Will gather in Brussels later this week. Ukraine's defense minister said on Monday the best response to Russian missile terror is the supply of anti-aircraft and anti-missile systems to Ukraine. Protect the sky over Ukraine. This will protect our cities and our people. This will protect the future of Europe. Evil must be punished. Shooting missiles at civilian infrastructure is evil. Using truck bombs with unsuspecting drivers to blow up civilian infrastructure is okay, I guess. Well, there's zero way for any of this to happen. They're asking for air defense networks. This is not something you set up overnight, even when you have it and you have the men to operate it. It's something that you don't just set up overnight. It takes time to set up. But unless the United States is going to send its own troops into Ukraine with Patriot missile systems, and I'll get into the problems with Patriot missile systems here again. I've talked about it in the past. I'll talk about it again. Unless they're going to send U.S. troops into Ukraine with U.S. Patriot air defense systems, there's really no way to do this. Not anytime soon. And I've also covered how air defense systems designed, developed, deployed by the West are inferior to Russian air defense systems. And this is something that even the West admits. This is CSIS, a U.S. government and arms industry funded think tank. This is their missile threat project, Russian air and missile defense. What does it say? It says, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union invested heavily in its air defense systems. As a result, Russia now possesses some of the most advanced air and missile defense systems in the world. And then it goes on and describes it's a tiered network. They have multiple systems that fulfill different roles. They're all connected together. The link will be in the video description. You can read that. And this is a Western source, Western analysts admitting that Russia has air defense systems there is no equivalent to in the West. And so I said the only thing that I can think of, and there may be others, but the only thing I can think of, an anti-missile air defense system that the West has that they could send to Ukraine, possibly, theoretically, would be the Patriot air and missile defense system. And there's no way they could train Ukrainians anytime soon to deploy these. And even if they sent Americans with Patriot missile systems to Ukraine, how are they going to keep them stocked with interceptor missiles? And why do I say that? Because they have a problem keeping the deployed Patriot missile systems right now in U.S. allied countries. They have a problem keeping them stocked with missiles during a conflict. So this is from the Wall Street Journal. U.S. sends Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia, fulfilling urgent requests. So this was March 2022. This is what the article says. The Biden administration has transferred a significant number of Patriot anti-missile interceptors to Saudi Arabia within the past month, fulfilling Riyadh's urgent request for a resupply amid sharp tensions in the relationship, senior U.S. officials said. The transfers sought to ensure that Saudi Arabia is adequately supplied with the defensive munitions it needs to fend off drone and missile attacks by the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in neighboring Yemen, one of the officials said. Now, if Houthi rebels in Yemen are depleting Saudi air defenses, what do you think Russian missile, drone, and military aviation strikes are going to do to Ukrainian air defense systems? And it gets worse. The interceptors sent to Saudi Arabia came from stockpiles of several other Persian Gulf countries after U.S. officials urged them to make the transfer, saying they would receive approval as required by U.S. law. Officials familiar with the discussion said. And why are they doing that? Why are they taking missiles from other people's stockpiles and sending them to Saudi Arabia? Why isn't the U.S. just making more missiles and sending them to Saudi Arabia? Because they do not have the industrial base to do that. And if that is the problem Saudi Arabia is having, the problem will be many times worse for Ukraine, if it was even possible to send these type of air defense systems to Ukraine, which it really isn't possible. There's also this article from Foreign Policy. Ukraine changes weapons wish list after Kyiv terrorism attacks. And they're just putting another list of weapon systems they had no chance of ever receiving or using in place of others they had no chance of receiving and using. So this is what Foreign Policy says. For months, Ukraine has been seeking long-range rockets and plentiful artillery shells after Russia destroyed public schools, parks, playgrounds, and power plants. Ukrainian officials were urgently resorting their weapons demands to NATO nations. I don't think Russia was deliberately blowing up public schools, parks, and playgrounds. Unless, as Washington Post has pointed out, Ukraine was putting military hardware in these places. On Monday, Ukraine's top parliamentarian sent letters to congressional leadership calling on the United States to prioritize the delivery of national advanced surface-to-air missile systems, which are jointly produced with Norway, as well as counter-rocket mortar and artillery systems, a clear sign that those defensive weapons have moved up the Ukrainian military priority list ahead of multiple rocket launchers like HIMARS, fighter jets, and long-range rocket systems that Kyiv has been demanding for months and not receiving, and having no hope of receiving. Zelensky, after a phone call with US President Joe Biden, stated that obtaining air defenses was his #1 priority. Then the article talks about how Ukraine is demanding all kinds of missiles, missile defense systems, F-16s, F-15s. These are warplanes. They don't know how to fly. They don't have the equipment or the personnel to maintain on the ground, or even airports to put them in where Russia wouldn't immediately destroy them. They're talking about ATACMS missiles for the HIMARS. This is the much longer range, 300-kilometer range missile that works with the HIMARS launcher. They also want these Gray Eagle drones. And I've talked about all of these, how impractical and useless all of this would be for Ukraine to have. And I've talked about how none of these systems they're demanding from the West would do any better on the battlefield than what Ukraine started this conflict out with in late February. They had everything. They had drones, they had warplanes, they had tanks, they had multiple launch rocket systems, they had everything, and Russia destroyed it all. The West is sending all of this equipment to Ukraine. Russia is destroying it all. They're demanding more. Russia will destroy it all. And this article actually even points out how impractical this all is. And it says, although Western air defenses could provide a patchwork shield against Russian missile strikes, the arrival of new batteries would not make Ukrainian airspace a no-go zone, even as the country's native air defenses have held up for more than 200 days, far longer than Western intelligence agencies initially anticipated. Now, even if the West delivers some sort of anti-air system to Ukraine, whatever that system may be, if the US cannot even maintain a steady supply of simple things like small arms ammunition and 155 millimeter artillery shells, how are they going to keep up with a constant demand for things like interceptor missiles? How are they going to keep up with that demand? Now, in previous videos, I've talked about how the US admits they're running low on HIMARS rockets, the rockets that they've been sending to Ukraine to fire these HIMARS. And I talked about how it will take years, according to the US, to build more of these rockets. And then I saw this article from Forbes. It says, new types of ammunition make Ukraine's HIMARS far deadlier. And actually what they're talking about is the US is out of the rockets Ukraine needs. So these are the rockets the US has laying around that could be fired by HIMARS. So they're sending that. Better than nothing. Now let's learn a little bit about these rockets. It says the rockets launched by Ukraine's HIMARS are the M31 unitary warhead, a 196-pound weapon effective against critical point targets. GPS-aided precision means the M31 can hit a specific target, such as a building or ammunition dump, but its effects are concentrated in a narrow area. While the M31 does have a fragmentation sleeve, which produces distinctive diamond-shaped shrapnel, it is not an area weapon. Then it goes on and it says, there is also a more advanced warhead known as the alternative warhead, or M30A1, which makers Lockheed Martin call the first munition developed to service area targets without the effects of unexploded ordnance. The secret of the M30A1 lies in huge numbers of tungsten BBs arranged around an explosive core, about 182,000 of them. The design is from a technology known as lethality-enhanced ordnance developed by Orbital ATK, later acquired by Northrop Grumman. This approach uses computer modeling to calculate the optimal size, number, density, and placement of fragments to ensure that a warhead produces the maximum possible effect against a specific type of target. The developers claim that the M30A1 produces the same sort of lethality as the cluster warhead. This blanketed an area of over 4 football fields per rocket, so a salvo of 6 would blanket half a square mile. This is for killing people. It's not for hitting fortified positions or ammo dumps. It's anti-personnel. It's for destroying trucks and civilian vehicles. That's what it's good for. And I'm sure that there are certain military applications Ukraine could use this for and may use this for, but I don't think that Ukraine or the US have the ability to track in real time troops moving around on the battlefield that would make this effective. They could shoot these rockets in a general area they think Russian troops are operating, and it could do damage, yes, but what are they most likely to use this for? They're most likely to use this for an area they know people will be walking around outside all the time, like a population center, like Donetsk City or Kherson City, or any number of other population centers that Ukraine has been terrorizing with deliberate strikes on the civilian population and will continue doing so. So keep an eye out for these tungsten BBs. If they, we see an attack in Donetsk City and we see these BBs involved, then you know where they came from. They came from rockets supplied to Ukraine by the United States, fired by HIMARS, deliberately into a civilian populated area. Using this warhead is meant to maximize the deaths of civilians and the destruction of civilian, not military property. So just keep an eye out for that. The Western media won't cover that. Then the Forbes article ends by claiming the flow of Western weapons to Ukraine continues and may even be accelerating as Russian rhetoric becomes more bellicose. The restraint in supplying only certain weapon types may finally be wearing off. And this is not true. This contradicts Western media coverage over months now of how the supply of weapons is decreasing, and how industrial production needs to increase and won't increase for another year or more. In some cases, at least 3 years. So it's not that restraint is wearing off. They're out of everything else. Now they're going to send Ukraine whatever else they have laying around, even if it's completely inappropriate. They're going to send it to Ukraine. And this is the Western media trying to spin it as if this is still legitimate and effective military aid. It is not. So that is where we are with the situation in Ukraine, or between Ukraine and Russia. These Russian missile strikes, let's keep an eye on them. Let's see how long they go on for, what type of targets they're hitting, how persistent the damage is to, say, Ukraine's electrical grid. And if this is a persistent campaign, this may be a prelude to a Russian offensive taking shape in the near future. Keep an eye on the number of Russian offensives. The Western media is admitting the offensive in Bakhmut, Ukraine losing ground in this key point. The Western media has admitted it is a key point. Let's see where else Russian forces start pushing and how temporary or permanent that looks. I have said that Ukraine's offensive is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. they are going to reach a point where they are overextended, their ranks are thinned out, they have no ability to reinforce the number of troops, nor the quantity of weapons and ammunition that they are using. And they will be facing Russian forces who are not only conserving their fighting capacity, but they'll also be reinforced by 300,000 additional Russian forces and associated equipment. So it's not a matter of if things turn around, it's a matter of when things turn around. And we need to keep a close eye on what is happening, and we can tell by what is happening whether that turning point has arrived yet or not. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube, please check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on Telegram. I update that several times a day. All of my YouTube videos are automatically backed up on Rumble and Odyssey. You can follow and find my videos on those two platforms. In the video description below, I provide the links to all of the articles that I reference, and there's also ways there that you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube videos. If an ad ever pops up, please feel free to skip past it. It is not helping me out at all. If you want to help me out, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and as a last resort, PayPal, because PayPal is changing its policies and may not be a platform I can use in the future. I don't know. For now, I can. To everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much. That's what allows me to do this work. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you again. And as always, thank you for watching.